Sometimes you have to put your camera down and throw life jackets, or you have to be ready to take a picture of that body. But again, for me, all of this is important, because if I'm here today, it's because I think that there is a different way to tell this story. And that's why I wanted to accompany you through this journey and to show you that a part of everything, we are talking about humans.
A lot of journalism students here today, I would ask you to really look at that if you ever had any enthusiasm for research. Because when Mary Colvin was murdered, instead of intensifying investigation by the international media as to why a leading international journalist would be so specifically targeted with Remy Oshlak, the French photographer, and in the same incident, the well-known photographer Paul Conroy, Mary Colvin's partner, who actually launched our documentary series, The Impossible Revolution, or after the premiere, he was very seriously wounded. But instead of seriously investigating that murder, seeking to call those responsible for that murder to account, what did the international media do? It seems to me that the international media pulled back from Syria.
In 2017, there were 4.5 million Congolese that were displaced inside their country. It's one of the biggest displacement crises so far. And still, any idea what's going on in Congo? Probably not, right? Because it's not, again, we saw so many bad news that we're kind of running out of emotion. This is a picture I took on the Greek beaches. There were more journalists and refugees. We were just overwhelmed. Everybody was recording: filmmaker, journalist, activist, charity worker, politician, police, troop, border guys, everybody was recording. But still, I think there is something missing. That's what I call the arithmetic of compassion. When we are talking about all this story, we don't have to forget the number one, the individual. So all this data is good to put a context, but it's important to bring the individual back into the story. And that's why he say like one death is a tragedy, a million death is a statistic. There is this psychologist, he's called Paul Slovich. He's saying the big number people can relate to them, the more who die, the less we care. Actually, it's true. If you remember this picture, it was all around the media, right? You remember the name of this little Syrian boy, true? But did you know that 14 Syrian children drowned in the Aegean Sea the next day?
The form of HTS, and the voice of those Syrian people is still not being heard. We hear the apologists for the Assad regime, we rightly hear a lot of condemnation of Hamas, but the voice of the Syrian people is missing.
But of course it makes me feel lucky, but it also reminds me that if I have any self-respect as a filmmaker or a journalist, this story must be told. We've a responsibility to wake up our own, people to do something about this. It's like if somebody was torturing, if somebody next door was torturing children in your neighbour's house and they were being tortured to death, what would you do? I mean, that was one of our challenges making that film. We were trying to give people a sense of context and maybe a sense of urgency about this. These are real people.
I guess for both the audience and even journalists themselves, it's kind of hard to figure if sources are accurate. And I mean, I'm thinking about Syria and the whole Russian state propaganda with Sputnik or other Russia TV, all the stuff that's put out there. How do you recommend for us to really make how would you even yourself know which sources you can trust and which you can't?
That's it's a very good question, and I'm glad it's the last question I'm going to answer today, really. Fundamentally, we must do our homework. We must be prepared to research the situation. For example, I recommended a number of books today. Some of the people we featured in the Syria, The Impossible Revolution, are well-known authors on Syria, as well as being well-known commentators. People like Yassin Al-Haj Saleh. It's not difficult to find out what's going on in these countries by reading your way into the situation, by looking for civil society groups on the ground. What are they saying? Looking at the overall picture, what are the independent human rights organisations saying? Get yourself a full context on the scene. It does require homework, because otherwise, if you don't read your way into the context, you yourself as a journalist simply becomes a victim of the propaganda of the key parties in the conflict. And the propagandist who is most effective, who kind of steals the agenda, you will become a mere purveyor of propaganda. So as I say, my only word is do your homework, look at all the sources commenting on a particular situation. Look in particular though for sources that are recognised as independent, that have strong mandates, particularly the human rights organisations in that context. But equally it has to be said that some of the political actors have more credibility than others. They're more accountable, they're more open, they're more transparent, and it does require a certain judgment. But there's no in fact, as I say, it's down to the old hard slog of reading, researching and talking to a widest array of people as possible on the ground.